First thing we'll do, though, we'll just get started off with the pledge, if you'll please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, if you'll please join me in prayer. Our Father in heaven, we always ask for your help. We always depend on your guidance. On behalf of our gathering today, I pray that each one of us kneels before you as a humble servant. Let us remember how important it is to show humility. We know how we know, Father, to live and live in the way of your Son. We shall live for him, Jesus our Savior, because he died for us. Father, please hear our prayer that today we ask that you watch over our world, our nation, our state, and our local officials alike. Please help us to remember your Son for every breath we take. It is in his name, Christ's name, we pray. Amen. I'd like to now welcome Baynard Ward.
Thank you, Will. Good afternoon. Just like to, I'm Baynard Ward, as Will said. On behalf of Power South, we'd like to welcome you to I believe the third annual legislative luncheon. We started doing this the first year I came here, and it seems to be a good way to bring our legislators and our community together to let them tell us about what's going on in our state and in our community, and allow you to ask questions of them. So just like to, before I get started, if you would, if you're affiliated with the chamber, if you're on the board, would you please stand? Let's give everybody with the chamber a hand. I know I was talking to Will outside, and he said that he does what he does for the high pay. I've sat on chamber board before, and I know that you do what you do because you have a passion for your community, and we appreciate the chamber's commitment to this event, and a special thanks to Chrissy and Maggie for all their hard work. We, for all, not just this event, but all the events that they do, we get to reap the rewards of their hard work and everything that they do for our community. So we're blessed to have them, and we're fortunate in our districts to have such fine legislators, and Senator Hawley and Representative Jones, and we appreciate all your hard work, and thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. I was talking to Representative Jones when he came in, and he promised me that he had a full brief on the NRA Foundation and the Yeti issue, so you'll get to hear about that. But with that, I don't want to take time away from them. We hope at the end we'll have time to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, I would like to welcome Senator Hawley to join us and give us a brief on everything that's going on in the Senate. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Indeed, a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. It's one of the things that I look forward to, actually, is the fine meal and also the good company that we're coming down to Andalusia to enjoy in Covington County. And tell you what a pleasure it is to represent you in the Alabama Senate, goes without saying. This session was somewhat different than the previous sessions I've been involved with, in that we finished early. We always start early in the sessions of an election. So when we were having elections this year, so we started actually in January, I believe it was, and we finished several days early. And that was quite a treat for those of us who had legislation. It moved along quite rapidly, and we were able to have a good session, meaning that we passed the budgets on time. They're good budgets, and I will speak to that to some degree. Before I do that, though, I wanted to say just a few words about the economy in the state of Alabama. And I'm reminded of our president a few months ago taking credit for the stock market going up. And all it took was one day and one negative word, and we went up like this. So when you speak to a group and take credit for a good legislative session and so forth, you're reminded of those where things are not quite so fast, not quite so smooth. I mentioned to Mike, and he agrees, I don't believe we've had a session where there hadn't been a local bill for a city or county in Covington County in the last 40, 50 years. Quite an accomplishment when that doesn't happen, and it's something that you're prepared for, but legislation on a local level means that those individuals didn't ask for county commissioners or school boards or whatever, did not officially ask us for legislation, therefore we didn't introduce it on our own. We had a good session with respect to legislation being passed. I think Representative Jones will speak to that in just a few minutes. The general fund budget was a balanced budget, as the Constitution requires, approximately $2 billion. And we did that without increasing any new taxes. We targeted several of these programs in the legislature for things I think will be of interest to you. We put 30 additional state troopers on state highways. We had a 3% cost of living raise for state employees. And this was the first COLA that our quality state employees have had in the last 10 years. The truth is there just simply hasn't been enough money, we didn't think, to be able to do that. With good management, increases in the economy, and by the way, Alabama's economy from the Florida line to the Tennessee line is booming. There are pockets where we would like to see lower unemployment rate, but it's the lowest unemployment rate since we've been keeping those records in Montgomery. Corrections is still the center point of the budgets, that in our medical programs. I'll give you an idea, again, an update on the prison system, and I'll hit it briefly. I'm sure Mike is much more tuned to that than I am. The budget had $55 million new dollars in the general fund budget to hire additional prison guards principally. That's quite an increase. We are defending ourselves on all fronts before the federal courts as I speak, and there are possibilities that things could be worse than they are, and we're hoping that we can negate that court litigation to some degree. All of it, much of it coming back to the probability that mental health is the culprit in much of our overcrowding and in much of our community problems and so forth. So the general fund budget had an increase of $8 million in the general fund budget. The education budget was the first budget we've had with a substantial increase in it since '08. I want to remind you of what happened in '08. '08 was the year that the recession took place, and it has taken us about 10 years now to balance our budget over the years. We had a substantial savings account in '08 when we had the recession. We also asked, and the state voters gave us a permission to borrow money from the trust fund. We've paid all those dollars back, and we're now doing a much better job with our education system as far as funding and being able to fund, and also to set aside some resources that we would call a savings account. So that's happening in the general education budget. The education budget itself was $6.6 billion. Remember, $2 billion for everything else in state government, 6.6, a comparison to the education budget. We had a pay raise for teachers for the first time, I said, in over 10 years. We had an increase of $1 per month for retirees and state and education employees that are retired. They get an increase in their check of $1 per month of service. And this was an increase also in a belief in what we're doing in pre-K. We had $18 million or so increase in, with your tax dollars, in the pre-K program throughout the state. The governor spoke the other day and made some comments about what she wanted to do with respect to the ethics commission. And her observation was, it didn't speak with her personally, but heard her say that she wanted to go to the Court of Criminal Appeals, Civil Appeals, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to appoint and get away from the appointment of individuals on the Ethics Commission and let those individuals on the court system do that. And we'll be looking at that and discussing it with her and see what the merits are of that particular legislation. Anyway, again, I want to thank you for allowing me to be your state senator, and what a pleasure it is to work with Mike Jones. Mike.
Well, let me start by saying I plan on saying not one thing about Yeti or NRA. So I think enough's been said. I do want to thank everybody here for allowing us to come. This has become one of the things we look forward to. Most of the events that we get to speak at, and we actually enjoy all those, you don't get a great meal with them. This is the unusual part, so we appreciate that. The other thing I do want to comment on is, and I think that you should all be aware of it, this is an excellent, whoever put this together did an excellent job. And Chrissy, or I don't know who did this. Did you do this? Okay. All right. Well, whoever did it, excellent job. The information, the data is very solid. I see a lot of these type of things at different events from Montgomery through here, and usually they're glaring with errors and mistakes. I don't see one mistake. I think it's an excellent document. You did a great job, so it's something you can rely on. In fact, I'll probably be hauling this around some when I'm speaking myself. I don't want there ever to be an event that I speak at to pass without thanking Senator Hawley. And I say this repetitively, and I know it's a broken record, but because I'm in Montgomery and I see the other relationships between members of the House and Senate, I can tell you that it is extremely good for our district to have a senator and a representative who get along as well as we get along. We work together extremely well. We communicate with each other extremely well. Our offices communicate with each other extremely well. And we work together on constituent issues about as well as anybody that I've seen in Montgomery. And I can't tell you how big a blessing that is to have that working with us. And for that, Senator Hawley, I'm eternally thankful. It makes my job much easier, so thank you for that. As far as the session goes, I've already had a few people comment. Now, one thing you may notice is I have new glasses. I don't know if it's age or the job, but we had to have an increase in the strength of the glasses, and I found myself doing this all the time, and I finally decided, okay, we got to do something about that. So we're working on that. Hopefully I don't have to take them off and on as much. Some of that was probably from last year. Last year, it was a tough year. This year, my role has changed. I play a new role in the House as Rules Chairman. And I think I had 3 or 4 people that when I came in today comment about how I'm smiling now more. And I'm like, you bet I am. This was a much better year. We didn't have some of those really bad things going on that we had to deal with like last year. And frankly, I had a spring in my step, I think, the entire session. I think everybody in Montgomery noticed that I was smiling much more. The role that I play And I have to say this, I was chairman of Judiciary Committee for a number of years. I very much enjoyed that job. It was a job that put me in close contact with a lot of the important bills, and I was able to work on those at very early stages. And for that, I really enjoyed that job. But I would also say that this new role that I've taken as chairman of Rules Committee is a big help to our district. It puts me in a position that not only that I can help formulate some of the things that go on in Montgomery as far as the direction we go, but also it allows me to do more here at home. And it allows me to work with leaders here more. It allows me to work on projects here more. Frankly, Senator Hawley and I can use it to our advantage quite a bit. He is if you don't know this, and you should, he is one of the top leaders in the Senate. And not much happens in the Senate unless Senator Hawley says yes. Okay, so when we have that kind of relationship, it helps our district. And so we're constantly trying to help on constituent requests. We're constantly trying to help on projects, whether it be road projects, whether it be things for the schools, whatever we can. And one of the important parts of that process is communication. And I'm going to give an example of that happened even during this session. Is school security became one of the issues, one of the topics that this session focused on. It was something that, frankly, it was important to me personally. If you have children in the school system, you take those issues very seriously and you want to know more about them. And so kind of in addition to all the normal things I was doing some research on my own, just trying to learn more about the topic. And I was surprised at how much is out there and available that I didn't know existed. I've communicated some with the sheriff about this, with Dennis. He and I had, I think, one conversation back during the session. I communicated with all three of our superintendents. I scheduled a meeting with them, and I think it was an early meet at Ted's office, and he was gracious enough to allow us to meet on short notice. But I wanted to have a meeting with the superintendents before I went back up into the session that coming week. And I wanted to learn from our superintendents what we were doing now, and then kind of also what the future looked like for school safety. And I'll go ahead and tell you this, our school superintendents briefed me, and we are ahead of the curve. If you want to know as far as where we stand, I think we're in a good position. The reality is that the culture is changing, and that the needs for school security are changing, and you either can ignore it and pretend that it doesn't exist, or you can just look it straight in the eye and let's face it and deal with it. And I think that's the smarter way to approach it. I also think that it's not prudent to just spontaneously throw things into place without knowing the facts, without having real data, without knowing who are the real individuals that need to be working this issue. And if you know me at all, you know that I'm big on due diligence. I'm a very big believer in doing your homework. And so that's one of the things we're kind of doing behind the scenes. I think it was smart that we took a step back, that we didn't do something and start trying to pigeonhole a security response this session, because we actually had done things that other states haven't done yet. We had done this 2 and 3 years ago. We already had studied this. We had a group in place. We already had made some changes, which our superintendents had already put those things into place. And so we were ahead of the curve compared to other states. And so because of that, we needed to take a breath. We needed to reevaluate, see what we can do to add to it to be more secure. I thought that was a very smart approach. Law enforcement has been very much a part of this conversation. I expect they will continue to play a strong role in this conversation. But in part of the research that I was looking, I found that the U.S. Secret Service was tasked with researching this as well. And frankly, if you've never looked on their website, they have a very valuable resource as far as looking at school security issues. They pretty much have looked at every shooting on college campuses going back, I think, to the very first. And they've studied every one of them and tried to look for common traits, similarities, problems. And they've looked at it not only from let's learn what happened, but they've looked at it as what are responses that could have reduced those risks. You can never reduce all risk. It's impossible. There's just simply no way to do that. But you can reduce the probability. And that's what this research data indicates. And so one of the things that you'll hear me recommending as we go forward is that we take advantage of these resources that our nation has already got in place, that we take advantage of some of the resources that our state officials have already been working on, and we put all this together and come up with a plan. And you're not going to have a plan that fits all schools the same. That would be impossible. Every school has a different factual situation. There are some rural schools, and I talked about this with Ted Watson during our meeting, that there was one rural school in particular that the response time for law enforcement was 45 minutes to get to the school. And it's because of how difficult it is geographically to get to the school compared to where their law enforcement headquarters was located. And so we looked at that. We had schools that literally the schools are right, within a block or two of law enforcement. So those are fast response times. So you can't come up with a plan that's going to affect all schools the same. There's too many variables. So you've got to come up with a plan that looks at it from a much more 10,000-foot approach as opposed to looking at it with these little details. And I think that's one of the things that the U.S. Secret Service data indicates, and what they've learned through their research is you can do preventive maintenance that has far more helpful effect on preventing these problems than you can necessarily on identifying them right on the scene. And if you can reduce these problems significantly, then you've reduced these episodes significantly. So I think that that's got to be a part of the plan, and I think you'll probably see more of that develop. There is a group that has been tasked with researching these issues. There's, the governor is waiting on their collection of data to be completed. I expect you'll hear more about that in the coming months. But I do think that's going to be a big issue for 2019 and the upcoming year. And I'd be surprised if you don't hear more about that in some of these elections that are coming up, especially once we get past the primary season. As far as, as far as how this works with us, I'm not on the group, but I continue to play a role behind the scenes. Because I'm probably one of the biggest nerds in the legislature, I tend to, well, I just admit it, okay? And I'm a readaholic. I have this desire to try to learn as much as I can before we make a response. And so I tend to just delve into it as deep as I can. There's so much data out there, it'd be a shame not to address this with an informed response. And so that's one of the things I do. And I don't do it because I'm on the committee or I'm on the task force. I do it because I think it's just a role that we've got to make sure that that data's been read and that there's some input regarding those issues. As far as the session goes, as a whole, this was a much easier session for obvious reasons. I think some of that is that we had, when you have a little bit more money to work with, it makes everything easier. This is one of the first years that since I've been there that we had a little bit more money to work with. I just haven't been accustomed to that. General fund's always just horrible. And this year we were able to do a little bit more with the general fund than past years. So it made life a little easier. The education trust fund, the budget for the education world, frankly, was much better. And so you saw some improvements. I'm sure Dr. Rodell is going to see some improvements. We made some additions with the two-year college budgets. There's a lot of training that's going to be focused more and more towards two-year colleges. They're going to probably see more from that. Dual enrollment. We're putting more money towards dual enrollment, which is paying off. Makes good sense for these high school kids to be getting college credit while they're in high school. Not just on college courses that they'll need for a four-year college degree, but also for skills that they can take into the two-year college system and frankly not have very much time left at all to complete those certificates and be right back into the world, making probably more money than most of the kids that are going to four-year school. So it's really incredible. As far as the session, we started January 9th. We ended March 29th, so that was a relatively fast session. The 2019 organizational session, and I get asked this all the time, when do you go back, when do you go back? Hopefully, I can say January 8th or thereabouts of 2019. That's when we start the organizational session for the next quadrennial. The next regular session is set to begin March 5th of 2019. And that's to give time for this new group that's going to be coming together in Montgomery to organize and discuss rules, discuss who's going to be on what committees, et cetera. And it takes a little time to put all that into place. And to speak on that issue, and I thought it was addressed very well in this handout, is you're going to see a lot of new faces in Montgomery. About a quarter to a third, I believe, of the legislature is going to be new faces. That's big. That means you're going to see some changes in committee makeups. You're going to see some changes in philosophy. You're going to see some changes in just general political approach on issues. Frankly, I kind of like it. It's interesting to me when you start having a new insurgence of new ideas and new faces and new voices. To me, that makes it a little interesting. Occasionally, it makes it difficult, but more times than not, it makes it interesting. As far as the primary election, I want to make sure everybody knows those dates. June 5th is our primary date. Please go and vote. November 6th is our general election date. And I think both of these dates are extremely important. If you're talking about the future of this state and our leadership, those are important dates. As far as this past session goes, and once again, the data's in your handout. I'm going to just address it verbally to go over it kind of quickly. This year, there were 922 bills filed. That was substantially lower than past years. For instance, last year, it was 1,031 bills. Of the 922 bills filed, 314 were enacted and sent to the governor. That's actually a high percentage. Last year, it was 29% of the bills that were filed were enacted. The year before that, it was 28%. This year, it was up to almost 35%. And so that's a high percentage. That can be good and that can be bad. Now, part of that means you've seen bills that have been refiled year after year, have been vetted and cleaned up year after year, and they're filing in position now to where they can pass. And so you see some of those bills. That's the reason why that percentage comes up a little. Sometimes also, especially when you have an election year like we seem to have this year, some members will find some issues that are important in their local areas, and you'll see some of those bills. A lot of local acts were passed this year. A lot of local constitutional amendments were passed this year, more than normal. And that kind of goes normal with election cycles. One of the handouts that I handed out, gave you some just raw data. And sometimes it's easier for you just to see it and visualize it than for just to hear about it. You really can't put it in context if you're just hearing it. So I wanted to give that to you. And these are things that are probably not generally handed out at political events. I just like giving the people I represent as much information as I can and to give you real facts, real data. I think it's helpful. Some of it is to let you know where the money goes. Some of it is to let you know where the money comes from. And I think that you probably would find some of that interesting. One of the things that I thought was interesting is if you look on general information, appropriation of all funds, total appropriations for fiscal year 2019 is $31.75 billion in Alabama, with a B. Now, of that, the general fund makes up about 6% of that. That's how small the general fund makes up as far as total funds appropriated. The education fund makes up about 21% of that total money. So total money that we budget every year just on the appropriated funds is approximately 27% this for fiscal year 19. And that's a good example. Now of that, there's a lot of money in the budget that we really can't change because it's fixed and there's not a lot we can do with. So Senator, is my memory correct? Is it roughly about 10, 11% of the budget that we actually can move around? Now when you think about that in the context of all the billions that come through this state, but that's all that we can actually move around. That's all that we can actually budget. It's a very small percentage of the total. And the reason for that is a great amount of the budget is controlled through constitutional amendments. Over all the decades, over all the years, through all the different issues that this state has incurred, different constitutional amendments were passed. And in doing so, it's locked in a lot of the money where it can't move. Now, that makes things difficult. So when we're working issues about Medicaid, when we're working issues that deal with whether it be the hospitals, whether it be prisons, whether it be schools, it's not that we don't want to move some things around. We literally cannot move some things around. And it's hard to explain that sometimes, but my thought was, let me give you the math. Let me just let you look at the numbers and you can see it for yourself. So we are limited on what we can actually do. As far as, and I also thought, and I'm sure that Dr. Waddell probably already knew this, the split between K through 12 and higher ed, and also with the proportion of the education budget is it goes to two-year colleges. And I think this number is accurate. 5.8% of the ETF is directed to two-year colleges. And that's come up some. That's actually higher than it's been in the past, and it needs to continue to come up. Two-year colleges play a very significant role in our state, and it's going to continue to increase. We've learned that it's a perfect resource, a perfect location for skill training for preparing our kids and our young people, and frankly, everybody, for jobs. So when you have these different skill jobs that come out and these different opportunities that come out across the state, our two-year colleges are placed perfectly all over our state to touch those things quickly and to make quick adjustments to affect job training. And so frankly, it's about time we identified it for that purpose, and we've started moving more and more funding towards that, and I think it should continue to increase. I hope it does. As far as bills this year, once again, there were quite a number. I'm by no means going to be scanning all that. I want to give you a few that we touched on. One, and I've heard yays and some boos on this one, but there have been some cities that had already had some local legislation that allowed Uber to come into some cities. We now have passed enabling legislation that allows it statewide. And so it's not obviously just Uber. There are other companies that do this thing. Some people, frankly, some of the younger people are about, you hear this all the time, it's about time, how did it take so long? Some people not as happy with it, but it is now in place. And so I think you'll see that evolve. I was probably not the biggest fan of that when I first started hearing about it, but I have to admit, I went to a conference in, I think it was Boston, and getting a cab was virtually impossible. And we started trying the Uber app, and frankly, it worked great. And I think one of the times I drove with somebody who had a full-time job, who had 3 hours to kill before he could pick up his kids. And so he got involved with Uber for that 3 hours just to kill time before he could pick up his kids. And I thought, well, that sounds like a pretty good plan. So it makes pretty good money. So we hope this works. We hope it works the way it's intended. We hope they also get some of the kinks out of it, but that has passed. Excuse me. And some of the things that always pass, come out of specific factual circumstances that are typically bad, but sometimes good. One that was bad is that there was one law passed called Emily's Law. This came out of my memory is, Senator, is that a young child was killed by a dangerous dog up in North Alabama, so I'm going on memory. And that from that, we, in reviewing the laws of our state, the owner of that animal apparently knew the dog was dangerous, but did not take precautions to secure the animal, and a child died. And so because of that, that has been addressed. And so now, by court order, a court can order that and determine if a dog is dangerous. Once it's determined to be dangerous, depending on what level, it either has to be secured, and if it's not, then there's criminal penalties potentially involved. And or euthanized depending on the severity and depending on the level of danger of the animal. It probably is something that should have been addressed, and it's probably time that it was addressed. And you do start seeing more and more now people that are, frankly, it's probably a form of abuse to animals and how they're treated that brings them to that point. But law enforcement, many times, their hands are tied because they've been limited in the past as to what they could do. This is going to change that significantly, and it's going to allow them to address these issues, not just on the scene, but it's going to allow it to have some long-term resolution by letting the courts get involved quickly and address some of these problems. And if an owner allows a dog to act out even beyond those actions that are supposed to be taken, then it's a felony. So they literally can be spending some time in prison for not taking those precautions. There was something that we did called Park for Patriots, and this was basically to allow members of the Armed Services, National Guard, I think we already do this for veterans, but to allow them free entry into our state parks. Makes perfect sense to me, so seemed kind of an obvious, easy thing to do. We did some similar things. We're trying to encourage small businesses to hire veterans. And so one of the things that was passed was the Veterans Employment Act. There was a similar version of this in 2012. This one actually is a little more broad, but it provides a tax credit to small businesses that hire unemployed or combat veterans for full-time positions, paying at least $14 an hour, and they have to be employed for at least 12 consecutive months. So a temp hiring is not going to work. They're going to have to be a full-time hire. Not only is this good for small businesses because it's a tax credit they can use to their advantage in hiring, which is helpful to them, it's also helpful to the veterans because it's trying to place them in some better paying jobs. And so the minimum job payment is $14 an hour. We also address some issues that are listed. One that is not listed that I thought helpful, and I actually hope the federal government maybe looks at this as something to consider as well, is a first-time or second-chance home buyer deduction. So basically, it's like this. If a young couple, a young family is wanting to buy a home, they've been renting, and they're trying to save their money. If they save their money and they use it for the purpose of buying that first home, then they can get an individual can get a $5,000 individual deduction on their tax return for state taxes, or a couple can get up to $10,000. Now, that's a pretty big deal on your state taxes. And if the feds would do this as well, that's an enormous deal on your taxes. And frankly, that would allow a lot of young people who are just simply not financially able to buy homes. It'll put them in a better position to start getting into buying homes and investing long-term. And it's a great motivating incentive. I think it makes good sense. I've already talked with one or two local bankers, and they were surprised. They had not heard of it, and they thought it was something that would be very helpful. So, so I hope that that's the case. One of the things that I've brought up at the Realtors meeting, and I brought up at our town hall meeting, and I like to bring these kind of issues up because I want to express the significance of local communication from hearing from you. Is last summer I had a meeting with a number of people in our community that own rental property, and they own probably a significant amount of rental property. And they came to my office here in Andalusia, and then we met for probably a good hour and a half, and they gave me a rundown of some of the problems that exist when they're trying to evict people that are not honoring their rental agreements. And after hearing it, it made sense. I went and did the research to confirm some things, and it all was confirmed. But if you take the court rules and you take the statutory law that deals with evictions and you put all those together, the timing issues, basically it can take 6 months minimum for someone to be evicted, and they're not paying their rent. They're dishonoring their agreement. You're trying not to in bad faith evict somebody. At the same time, it's not fair to the landowner who owns that property, who's making payments on that property more than likely, to not be able to be paid the rent. And right now our law, once we did the research, it was surprising how difficult it was and how much time it takes at a minimum. And so I had some research done after that meeting in the summer and looked at California, Texas, Mississippi, and our law. And it shocked me, and I told this to the realtors, and some of them were surprised. California is the toughest, I think, in the nation on renters. They don't give them any slack. They kick them out quick. Frankly, a little harsh. And I was surprised. It's one of the most liberal states in the nation, and they are some of the harshest on renters. Texas was sort of middle of the road. Mississippi was similar to us, but we were definitely probably on the more conservative end. It takes a lot of effort for someone to be evicted in Alabama. And what we did is we went to Texas, since it was sort of middle of the road, and we used that as a pattern. I'm big on not reinventing wheels. A lot of people hear me say that often, especially in Montgomery, it's rare anything we're going to ever see is the first time it's ever been seen. Why don't we go look what someone else did and try to learn from that? So Texas looked like a good pattern. And so right now you can have 4 default issues per year in Alabama, and they can be cured, and you can continuously, or not cured actually, and you can avoid the eviction. You can delay it out for months. We reduced it from 4 to 2 per year. We also reduced the non-curable default reasons. Specifically, and by the way, the Act, and some of the realtors were asking me about it, the Act number is 2018-473. But specifically, if someone's manufacturing, cultivating, importing, transporting, possessing, furnishing, administering any or use of illegal drugs in a dwelling, it's a non-curable default issue in a rental. Now, that seems like a no-brainer, but we added most of that into the law. It was not as much as what I just read before. If you've got illegal use, manufacture, importing, possession, furnishing, or discharging a firearm or firearm ammunition, except in self-defense, it can be a justification, non-curable eviction. And if you breach the rental contract 2 times for the same reason within 6 months, it's non-curable. You can be evicted immediately by the owner. And what I found out is, and I really didn't know this until I met with some of our local people, is that it's typically the same people, and they take advantage of the system. And they'll rent at one location, they'll pay 1 month's rent or 2 months, and then they don't, and they know it's going to take months. And then when they do finally leave, they go to another one and do the same thing. And I'm sure probably Dennis gets calls on that kind of thing all the time. I see him nodding big. And so this is a way of trying to prevent people from gaming the system. And the system in our situation, and it is across the state, is that people who invest in our community and they invest in these properties, it's a business. And if they don't get paid rent, they lose the business, just like any other business. To me, it's no different than if someone goes into a store and steals, and shoplifts. It's the same thing. And we can't expect business to stay in business if people are constantly stealing all the stuff. So we've got to address it. We did. David Sessions is a representative. He's actually running for the state senate. Some of his people in his area down in Baldwin County had similar concerns. He heard that I was doing this research and asked if he could bring the bill. And because of this new role I'm in, it made it easier for me. And so he brought this bill and it was passed. And but the origin of it is here in Covington County. And I thought it was just a good example to let people know what you bring to me very much can have an impact statewide. And I will always listen to you. I'll always do the research. And if it's something that is something we can work on and we can pass, then by all means, we're going to give it a shot. Senator Hawley helped me pass this. This is one of those things that could or could not have passed. This was the first year it was brought. And thank you, Senator Hawley, for helping me in the Senate with this as well. We also made some incentives to try to help pay off loans or assist in paying off loans for teachers who got their training for math and science teaching degrees. That's something that you'll hear more about. I'm sure Ted Watson will be hearing more about, and some of the teachers in the area or up and coming teachers. DUI law, I want to speak to this because for a lot of people in our community, this is a big issue. I'm the city judge for Andalusia, so I deal with this quite a bit. There were a couple of changes, but one that's significant is that right now the law says this: if we look at the number of DUIs someone has within a 5-year window, so if they have 3 DUIs within a 5-year period of time, then the punishment is a certain range. They have to spend so many days in jail, mandatory. If it's 4 DUIs within a 5-year window, it's a felony DUI, and it goes up to the circuit court. That's our law now. The law has changed as of this session. It goes into effect, I believe, July 1st, that the window is now 10 years. And so the look-back period for how many DUIs someone has is in a 10-year period of time. And once you ever get a felony DUI, from that point on, any DUI you get is a felony DUI. And that's a big deal. And I think you'll see this when you start looking at some of the patterns. One of the things I do in city court is I look back at the history of someone to see if there's a problem, if there's a pattern. And frankly, DUIs are scary things sometimes. Now, when you have that isolated DUI, a person had one in their life, and it was obviously they were just stupid, you still have to be responsible for it. But you look at it is that it may be just someone was stupid. And those are out there. And that's probably the bulk of the DUIs that we see in our community. It's just that one isolated stupid event. But frankly, there's a number of people in all communities that constantly drive around drunk, and how they don't kill somebody every time they do that, I don't know. And it's a serious thing, and many people die because of it. So this is a way of looking at that and locating those patterns, those long-term problems. One of the things that I tell people in my court all the time is I tell them, hey, I don't care if you drink, just don't drive. You can drink all you want to. You can drink till you can't breathe. That's your call, but don't drive. And we've got to be pretty vigilant on that. And so this is something that will address that issue. Another thing that, especially in a state like ours that has a lot of military families, we did the Military Family Job Opportunity Act, and this is where if you have a spouse from somebody who's in the military and they have to move with their husband or wife because of their military jobs and they're being transitioned, oftentimes they may have a degree, they may have a specialty, they may be lawyers, they may be engineers, they may have all these special certifications. But if they're from one state where they got certified and they come to our state, it doesn't transfer. And so they're almost kind of start from scratch every time they make those moves. A lot of states are now trying to work with that and trying to help that situation. So this act that we passed, with few exceptions, allows temporary licensing so that they can then get certified locally. It also, in some circumstances, as long as the requirements from the other state that licensed that family member are at least what we have or greater, it doesn't require any retesting. They can simply come transition right in. I think it's a great way to help these families of our military, and it makes good sense that we try to work with them on those fronts. And if they already have passed those tests and those certifications, it's just a good thing to help them. Once again, there are a bunch of bills. I've taken a lot of time, but part of the thing I try to do when we have these meets is to give you some real facts and some real data and some real examples, and I hope that I've done that. But we always are open to taking questions, so if you have any, we will do our best. We don't guarantee an answer for all of them, but we'll do our best. Yes, sir.
I've noticed on the brochure, the last sentence, I think, on the first paragraph, it says, most of the bills were signed into law by Governor Ivey. Was there anything particular that she didn't sign that would stand out in your mind?
The only thing that I knew was in jeopardy, and I haven't looked back to see if these were the particular ones, were some local acts that dealt with alcohol. There may have been one or two of those that weren't signed, but I have not looked back to see specifically which ones they were. But I knew that some of those were close on timing. If they were passed, and there's a 10-day rule that we have that we have to apply in these situations, that if she were to sign it and we didn't override at that 10-day mark, then it fails. So I think that applied to a couple of those local acts. And I think those members were aware of it when they started trying to pass them. They knew they were running those acts late into the session. And that's true. This session, I even told that to some of our local folks, is that there were we had some conversations about some potential local acts, but because of the session starting early and finishing early, and you have some requirements on publication notice, it was going to make it very difficult for some things to be done this year. It would make more sense to address them next year. And so I think that's what we're looking at. Anything else? Any other questions?
I have a question for Senator Holly.
Thank you.
From a historical perspective, how long has it been since there's been this much swing or change in legislative seats?
About 40 years, at least, maybe 50. When I was elected in 1974, the freshman class in the House was 72 or 73 members, somewhere in that. So it only left about 25 who'd had any experience. And Joe McCorkadell was elected Speaker of the House. But he was elected with freshman legislators, and I don't recall the Senate number, but it was parallel to the number in the House at that time. So this will be the next highest number of new faces in the House and in the Senate, about roughly 25–30%.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
My name's Dirk Price, and I'm here representing the Physically Challenged Bow Hunters of America as president and local hunt coordinator. All right. Got it. And this is a nonprofit that helps disabled people get back out into the woods with their help, where they can enjoy the sport of bow hunting. My question is twofold. First, what happened to the bill that was last year, which would have enabled landowners to bait deer rather than the current law, which has to be out of sight and at least 100 yards away? This would help our disabled hunters have better success in their quest for harvesting a deer. And the second part of the question would be, how do we go about getting a change to help physically challenged hunters, as they have on the fisheries side, get a event disabled license, a 3-day event disabled license to help out-of-state disabled hunters come in for a lesser hunting fee?
To answer the first question, the legislation that was introduced this year passed the Alabama House and came to the Senate, came out of committee, came to the floor, and on numerous times was on special order, only to be set aside and moved on because of a filibuster or threat of one. On the last day, the bill was brought before the Alabama Senate, and a cloture petition, which is a vote to cut off debate, was circulated. It has to have under our rules in the Senate, a minimum 21 affirmative votes for the bill to pass. It got 21 votes and 7 nays or something like that. It like one vote being passed this past session. And basically it was 5 or 6 folks just didn't like the bill. I never could figure out why. I thought it was a good piece of legislation. I supported it and will continue to do that in the future. I think the argument you make about helping the blind bow hunters would be a extremely good thing to debate and offer as information on the floor of the Senate, and I appreciate that comment. Mike?
Yeah, I was definitely going to make everybody aware that the House passed that bill. Overwhelmingly, by the way, but we get to play these on each other all the time, by the way. As far as the future, one thing I can say, working with the Department of Conservation, they are very good to work with. And anytime we brought issues like this to their attention, they have always been very open to me as far as willing to work with us and find ways to deal with these kind of issues. We did pass an event hunt, and it may have been only for the veterans. It may have been disabled veterans. It may not have been open broad enough. And that may be what we need to do, is to go back and make sure that law is, if it's not open wide enough, is that we modify it so that it's wide open to, it doesn't matter who you are, if you're disabled, that it would allow that option. And so that might be what you're referring to, and if that's something that we need to address, sir, that's a fairly easy thing for us to address. And so I will make a call to conservation and find out and see what we can do. I've seen some of your references to what you've been doing on Facebook, and it looks like a great thing. So we'd be glad to work with you.
Mike, on behalf of veterans, I'd like to thank you for pushing a little local bill through that. Most people have noticed recently the Highway Department unannounced put up 2 signs, one right across the mall on the bypass, and the second one, I think, at the entrance to the elementary school coming up, 29. Representative Jones, at the request of some local veterans, had this pushed through the legislature, and it is now designated the Veterans Memorial Highway, thanks to him.
And it was a dual effort. I have to give great credit. We do all those together, so I appreciate it very much.
I'll address my remarks to both of you. As you know, the infrastructure in our highways and roads is the lifeblood of economic development all over the state. As it presently stands, there's not been any increases in tax revenue from gasoline and fuel in order to maintain and build additional roads. I know there was an effort in order to get a bill passed, and I think it was like 6 cents per gallon. I'd just like to know what your comments are, or is that particular thing is going to be addressed again, since it's a non-election year and it does talk about taxes.
You want to start with that first?
I would believe that the next session of the legislature will have introduced legislation that will address that issue. I think the arguments of need are way beyond anybody being able to discount them. Our roads and our bridges are in many cases unsafe, and our children and families ride on roads and bridges that are not safe in this state for them. And I would certainly entertain a proper and appropriate answer to that question, which means additional revenue.
And Senator Holly mentioned this came up not this past session, but the one before, and that was one that an issue I supported. The reason I supported it is I called our county engineer and asked for him to give me a pretty detailed report on the status of our bridges and our roads in just Covington County. I didn't go any deeper than that. I just wanted to get that visual. And when he gave me the report, frankly, it's somewhat stunning. the condition of many of our bridges. And the problem is that there's simply not enough funding. The county commission doesn't have enough money to go around and replace every one of these bridges. It's extremely costly to do that, and without some sort of increase in revenue, it would be virtually impossible to go around and touch every one of these bridges. And so more and more, as those bridges become worrisome, you'll see signs that say that you can't cross if your load is over blank tons, or you can't cross if, you'll see schools sometimes don't allow buses to cross certain bridges because, for safety reasons. That's crazy. And frankly, some of those bridges are causing school buses to reroute 15, 20 or minutes or longer because they have to avoid certain bridges. And that's wrong. I mean, if that's a very basic need that we have to serve, and that's something that we need to make sure we touch. I do, one of the questions I was expecting is, what do y'all expect the issues to be in 2019? So that's actually one of the things the issues I expect to be addressed are school safety, prisons, infrastructure improvements, which is our roads and bridges, evaluation of our state's revenue and ethics. I think those are the big topics you'll be seeing in the next year, and you'll be hearing about some work being done behind the scenes in preparation for next year. But, sir, there's no question we have to touch that issue.
Hey. Oh, wait a minute. I know why you're smiling, because you didn't get any opposition for re-election. And everybody's saying, you mean he didn't get an opponent? I said, no. Why didn't he? Well, I don't know. But anyway, Judge Jones, I want to, you mentioned your municipal court. I want to tell you, you do a fine job, and if anybody thinks I'm sucking up to you, I'm not. You just, you did try to punish me over there the other day. All those poor people in there and couldn't pay our fines. But I want to tell you, if you come, you said you made a trip to Texas. Did you, you came over to Texas?
Years ago, I went to Texas on learning about juvenile law.
Oh, I see. Well, I want you to come back, because I'm going to give you the royal treatment over there. But on that tenant thing, we do have. Did you put in Texas? We have a jury trial if somebody wants to kick somebody out of their house, and I know Texas is pretty much a tenant's paradise. It took them forever to get me out of a place over there. Now look, I got two more things. I want to. Your big write-up here is about HB 317. Now that's the one, the voice of Alabama politics, on 11 o'clock a.m. on Sunday mornings. An excuse for me not to have to go to church. But what do y'all think about them? They're always criticizing you, and especially they're on you for this. They say it's a sham ethics bill, and I want to address that. But the other thing, what about this stupid, unconstitutional, constitutional amendment that's being proposed? Isn't that in Alabama? Isn't there one to make the 10 Commandments? You can put the 10 Commandments in public places. Do you know the havoc that's going to cause? Roy Moore will be putting it up on in your office somewhere. What do y'all think about that constitutional member? Did you vote for that?
That was about 5 things in that.
Too many questions. Yeah, to answer your question, yes, sir, I voted for it, and I'm going to give you the constitutional right on the 5th of June to go and vote your convictions. You vote yes or you vote no, and I'm going to do the same thing at the constitutional amendment on the ballot dealing with that issue.
I thought it'd be in November.
Well, November, General. Is it November or June?
I think it's on November.
I'm sorry, you're correct myself.
I did, and if you read it in context, you'd see the entirety of it. And the act requires it to be placed in context with other religious symbols and things of that nature. So it's not an isolated, just put the 10 Commandments out. It's to be put in context with other historical things of that nature.
Isn't there also language that says the state won't spend any
That's
state
correct.
funds defending lawsuits that are brought about it?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So it's frankly, I don't think it's something, I think it's something that would pass constitutional review because of how it's drafted. And I actually don't watch The Voice because I'm in church when that's coming on, so
Yes.
We appreciate all that y'all do for us. One thing, y'all were instrumental in getting our dual enrollment program back out at the airport, and without y'all's support on that, we wouldn't have, Senator Hawley was very instrumental in getting that done, and without that, we wouldn't have our aviation school out at the airport. One of the things I'd like for y'all to put on 2019, though, is rural health care. As Senator Hawley well knows, Elba Hospital closed. With the failure to go and expand Medicaid, that put rural hospitals in real jeopardy. Alabama Hospital Association estimated 20 rural hospitals would close, and we're getting toward that point. Our hospitals in Covington County are struggling, both of them. And if you talk with them in any detail, they'll both tell you the very same thing. So without some kind of assistance, either through, and it may be too late to join Medicaid expansion, but without some kind of assistance, a lot of rural hospitals are going to be closed, and as soon as a rural hospital closes in your community, economic development becomes almost impossible. So I'd like for that to be on the 2019 list some way, shape, or form, and if there's anything we can do to help you get it done, we'll do it.
Anybody else?
Okay, well,
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.